You would be tougher to be a resume writer and help people get jobs in D.C. You would essentially.
If I was a government, there's actually people who do all they do is government style resumes or formatted resumes. They've had a slight downtick in business. I guess lately. I would guess.
I bet the good ones. I mean, you kind of just become you're like an almost like an ad campaign manager at that point in time.
Right. Or they might have. I mean, who knows? They might have business like people transitioning out of government jobs, which is a nice segue into what I'm going to talk about.
Okay. So as people, I guess as people maybe now the government jobs don't feel as safe, maybe people are coming into the private sector. Or anybody maybe going back to work. That's certainly a more difficult transition for somebody rather than going from job to job. Not working to a job. And I've seen people, at least who've applied for things that we've done, are like, I am proficient in Word. Like, you're supposed to be proficient in Word, right? Or I can type 45 words a minute, and you're kind of thinking, that's great, but everybody can type 60 words a minute now. It's called, how fast can you type on your cell phone 60 words a minute?
Right, exactly. Well, yeah, and so it becomes, people get even more anxious about, everybody gets anxious about writing their resume, which is kind of why we're in business, but people get more anxious about it when they're out of their comfort zone and they're making some type of transition so that they don't necessarily have the specific experience in their career that has to do with what they're going for. And then it becomes, well, how do I sort of solve that problem in my resume without making stuff up that isn't truthful? How do I present myself? And it's just, there's just a number of different things that you can do. And I know that I've talked about this topic before on this show, but for whatever reason, I've been getting a lot of requests lately of, like, let's say a mom, like a stay-at-home mom who's been home raising a family for years and years, is now going back to work for whatever reason. It's like, how do I fill the 9-year gap in my employment in a resume and do it in such a way that seems fairly seamless and natural?
to get rid of the I've used AOL on the resume, right?
Exactly. So then it becomes like, and so 99% of business resumes that are created fall into two categories. And so one would be the traditional reverse chronology type format that that's kind of like the tried and true method. The other would be the functional format. The 1% I'm speaking of is like the wacky sort of really super creative type of resumes that are always out there. But the great majority is either going to be a functional format or a reverse chronology format. So if you are attempting a transition, usually it's a functional format is a good way to go. There's a number of reasons, but one of the main reasons is that it sort of deflects the reader of the resume from the fact that you might not have the specific work history experience in this one particular thing that you're interested in. So then you make kind of the accomplishments in your career and the underlying skills that translate the focus of the resume, and that's what you do in a functional format.
So if you have somebody going back to work and you're trying to find, as you say, finding the functions that you have done over the past X amount of years, how do you I guess put that into writing?
Sure. There's a number of things you can do, but let's just take the one example of, let's say it was a mother going back to work, hasn't worked for a number of years, okay? But let's say, usually moms tend to, just as a sort of a rule of thumb, they tend to be involved in community things and a lot of times in volunteer things, or if they have kids in school, they've been involved in some type of school-related activities. Yeah, I'm getting away. But so what you do is you can take those experiences and categorize them and just break them out. So you could say like, let's say the person handled some type of fundraising thing for a school, and they handled literally the grants portion of it, or the bringing in the funds, organizing that information in a software program. Let's say QuickBooks, or let's say it was an Excel program or something like that. So they have actual real world experience, so to speak, using that particular software, yet they weren't in a paid position. But that's okay. You can still talk about that experience in essentially the same manner as you would if the person was in a paid position. And it's just a matter of categorizing these areas of knowledge, breaking them out, and then giving brief descriptions of what that person did. And even if it was, again, even it wasn't a paid situation, it illustrates that person has certain experience areas.
So as you go through this process, and you're putting words to the experiences that you've had and turning that in as a resume, is there a difference, I suppose, just to take it one step further, but is there a difference in, the examples versus and how you might back those up? Because you talk about these unpaid positions, right? So now all of a sudden it's, as a hiring manager, it may appear a little different, like, raise money for PTA.
Right.
Is there a difference in the way that you put words to it?
There might be a slight difference in the way you describe what you did, because it is it's a different manifestation of those skills. It's a different context. But what you really want to focus on is that the important thing to mention or point out is that this person has this area of knowledge. They've just developed that area of knowledge in a different context, in a different venue. So that's kind of the way that you do it. And then when you enumerate, let's say this person what often happens is the person used to be in the workforce, but it might have been many years ago. So instead of having a traditional section where you list your employment, you can talk about your employment in 2 or 3 brief sentences and summarize what you did towards the end and just call that your work history section, and just do it in a slightly different way, especially if you're trying to keep it to one page, which is often a good idea for a functional format.
When you go about this functional format, and maybe you've been out of the workforce, is it more important, and this is just a personal question I would have, is it more important to try to relate to maybe who that hiring manager is, and potentially doing some more research on who that hiring manager is, maybe what the company is?
You absolutely want to know. You absolutely want to put and this is what anybody who's interviewing for any position wants to put their feet in the shoes of the person who's doing the interviewing, and so to speak. So you definitely want to know, what is this person looking for in a candidate, and really ask those questions. Not always just based on what the job description says, but oftentimes just, let's say, by doing an informational interview, let's say with a company that didn't give you an interview, and find out why, and then you get more information that way. There's just a number of things you can do. But basically, you obviously want to be presenting that information that is going to be of greatest interest to the reader. So you really want to be able to illustrate that if I were to be given the opportunity to do this job, here are the reasons why I'd be able to be effective in it.
Go ahead.
Right. And just the fact that I haven't worked for 9 years is actually irrelevant, because I did this before, and in these 9 years that I haven't been actually officially making a paycheck, I've done this, this, and this. I've done something that has to do with administrative work. I've done something that has to do with accounting. I've done something that has to do with customer relations in some manner, and actually breaking it out.
And I've dealt with 3 kids.
Exactly. Yeah. You can get creative, and there's no hard and fast rules for how you present the information, which is one of the things that's kind of cool about resumes, is that you don't absolutely have to, we don't use objective statements anymore, because they tend to focus kind of on what that person is looking to gain
and they all say
in
the
their
same
own
thing.
career, and they all tend to say the same thing anyway. You want to focus more on how you're going to be able to help them solve the problems they're facing.
Do you have people like Cyberstock their hiring manager? I'm serious. I can imagine, and you talk about mom who's been out of the workforce for 9 years,
right,
and now coming back as your example.
Right.
You could literally cyberstalk the hiring manager, figure out if they have kids, who the relations may be, and all of a sudden you have you could almost control the interview in some way.
Without getting arrested, that might be a good idea.
Well,
yeah.
People cyberstalk each other all the time, right? It's like the new thing.
Right. No, that's actually a good point. And what's behind that point is just the fact that anytime you're going for a job or trying to get an interview, just any competitive edge you can possibly get is a good thing to do. And really, really trying to find out, okay, what does the hiring manager want in the candidate? Because a lot of times the human resources description of the job and the actual job itself are have become different things over the past 10 years when the job description was written 10 years ago, right? And being able to find out what kind of employee does this person want? What knowledge areas are important? What experiences are important, to the person who's actually doing the hiring and figuring out how to do that. And that helps you if you can find that out beforehand somehow. Let's say if you know somebody at the company.
You cyberstalk them, Kevin. You cyberstalk them.
Right. Cyberstalk them. Or if you know somebody at the company,
right.
you might be able to find out these things and then craft your resume
Walk by their office and find out how many kids they have and if their kids play soccer. I mean, I'm just thinking of all the different creative ways.
Sure.
Of course, I'd send Samurai Swords to somebody, so
it
changes the whole scope, doesn't it?
There you go.